Okay, I'm just going to go over a few things dealing with the Constitutional Convention that I want you to know. Events that took place while our founding fathers were there and when it happened. And you will see these things tomorrow on a little LMS quiz. So take some notes and send me a picture. Constitutional Convention, 1787. Now, even though the Constitutional Convention, they met in 1787, where is that? Okay, I tend to look at myself and not at the picture, not where I need to be looking to look at you. The Constitutional Convention was in 1787, but the Constitution is not going to be fully enacted or ratified or put into place until 1789. And so there's 2 years difference here, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get into all of that, but it has to do with Federalist versus Anti-Federalist. But I first want to talk to you about what went on during the Constitutional Convention, because at the Constitutional Convention, you had representatives from almost all the states. Every one of them didn't show up, but almost all of them did. And they meet in Philadelphia, and you will need to know that, so you can write that down, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And from 1787, from May to September, they negotiate and discuss and talk about things about the government. Of course, a lot of them didn't like the idea of doing away with the Articles of Confederation. They felt like that was not something they were supposed to do, because under the Articles of Confederation, the main governmental power rested with the states, and the states didn't want to give up their power. But they're going to have to do that because the country is simply not able to maintain as it is. So what they're going to do is they're going to meet and they're going to hammer out a lot of differences and a lot of controversial issues. The first of which is slavery. Okay, so from now until we talk about the American Civil War, and you could almost say from this period in time, and even before this, and even up until today, race relations within our country have been in a bad way. So anyway, in 1787, one of the biggest issues is going to be slavery, whether or not to ban it, whether or not to do away with it. And of course, there are a large group of men of our founding fathers that want to do away with it. Thomas Jefferson even said, having slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't really want to let it go, but you don't want to maintain holding on to that wolf either. So, in other words, they were in a dilemma. If they had stopped slavery, just stopped it cold turkey, freed all the slaves, that would have been economically disastrous for not just the white men and women, but for the blacks too. I'm not saying that slavery was a good thing. No way. I mean, that of course should never have taken place. But here, when you had slavery, slaves did have a home and they did have a job. Now, I know they're not getting paid in money, but they are getting paid in care. Slave owners did not want to let their slaves be sick. They did not want them to be injured. For the most part, this was an investment. I mean, they didn't see them in a humanitarian sort of way, but they did see them in a monetary sort of way. And so they did not want them to be sick or hurt or what have you. So slavery still, I mean, I'm not trying to justify it in any way, but to just end it cold turkey would have been disastrous. So what they tried to do, what some of our founding fathers did, and some of the compromises they're going to develop during the Constitutional Convention, had to do with beginning to eliminate slavery over time, which of course it wasn't fast enough, and obviously a civil war is going to eventually erupt, and which is going to free the slaves and end slavery. But that's for another lesson, another day. So right off the bat, one of the issues that they have to compromise on is slavery, and they basically agree to leave it alone, because had they done something to end slavery in 1787, all of the southern states would have walked away, and we would have been a divided nation at that time. This time period, right after the American Revolution, when our country is really just getting started as its own independent self, is seen as the critical period in American history, because it's during this time when we really could have easily collapsed, easily been taken over by another country. We could have just collapsed within ourselves. Anyway, a lot of problems. So one of the things then about the slavery issue is they're just going to leave it alone. Okay, so basically that's done away with. But of course it's going to be a hot topic, and it's going to be something that they continue to negotiate and discuss and worry about until the Civil War. So the next major issue was representation. How is each state going to be represented? In other words, under the Articles of Confederation, Rhode Island, who didn't have near as many people as Virginia did, was represented the exact same amount. So when they voted on something, Rhode Island was one vote, as was Virginia was one vote. So you have probably thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of more people in Virginia than you did in Rhode Island. And so a lot of people felt like that was unfair. But of course the small states liked that. They liked being equal. So one of the things that's going to eventually emerge is known as the Great Compromise. And it has to do with representation. The Great Compromise. Which is also known as the Connecticut Compromise. CT is the postal abbreviation for Connecticut. And it's called the Connecticut Compromise because the man who came up with it was from Connecticut. His name was Roger Sherman. Now with the Great Compromise, basically for representation, if you remember under the Articles, we had a unicameral House of Representatives, or unicameral Congress. One house, and one house represented one state. So what they're going to agree to do to fix this problem of representation, where some states are much larger population-wise than the other states, they're going to agree to make a bicameral Congress. Congress is going to become, instead of unicameral, one house, it's going to become bicameral. Then we're going to create a Senate and a House of Representatives. And of course, we still have this today. This is still what we use today. And of course, that's one of the things that makes us unique. America still has the same Constitution that they developed in 1787. Most countries don't have that. Most countries, you know, they end up with dead people lying in the streets when they have a transition of power. And of course, this transition of power this time is looking a little bit different than what we've had in the past. Again, we should be praying for our country, our government, our leaders to make wise decisions. Okay, but anyway, these two houses then, what they decided with the Great Compromise was that the Senate would be based on exactly what the Articles had been based on. It's based on equality. I think you can still see the board. And we know today that there are 2 senators from every state. We have 2 from West Virginia, we have 2 from California, we have 2 from Virginia, 2 from Florida. Every state, irregardless of the size of the state, irregardless of whether or not it's a huge geographic state, or whether or not it's a small geographic state, or whether or not it's huge as far as population goes, or small regardless of population, it's still equal. We have the same exact amount of authority and power as as senators in California, as senators in Alaska. We're all the same in the Senate. And that's why it's classified as the upper house. More requirements are made for senators. They have to be older. They have to be more experienced. They have to have larger and better residency requirements. But anyway, the House of Representatives then is the lower house. And now this one is based on population. And I'm not sure if you can see this or not. So, and this kind of takes us back to our lesson on the Electoral College a little bit, because we get the numbers of the electors that we have that represent the states. We get that number of electors for the Electoral College based on how many people we have in Congress. So everybody has 2, but everybody doesn't have the same number in the House of Representatives. For instance, West Virginia, today we have 3 members in the House of Representatives, and that could change as a result of this census that has taken place this year. If we've lost population, we may lose representation. We may go from 3 to 2. If we increase population, which I don't think we did, but if we increase population, we may go from 3 to 4. We'll just have to wait and see when all those results are in. But in the House of Representatives, there are 3 members there that represent West Virginia. But in the House of Representatives, there are 53 members there that represent California, because they are so much more populous than we are. And that's pretty important when you talk about these 2 things. And so this was a compromise, and one of the most important things about our government, and they seem to have forgotten how to do this. And so I wish they would all take a little bit of a history lesson and get back to some of our roots. Our politicians are supposed to make compromises. Compromises is really a key in relationships and all kinds of things. Now, we as Christians know that there are certain things we never compromise on. We never compromise on the deity of Christ. We never compromise on the authority of the Bible, of the Holy Scriptures. We don't make compromises on those important things, but we might make compromises on what type of music we like to listen to that are Christian music or not Christian music, or what style of Christian music. I mean, there are ways in which we make compromises. Compromises is the way to a good relationship, and it's really the key to the way our government works, because our country is huge and is so diverse. We have accepted and allowed in every type of immigrant from every type of culture and every type of country. We don't refuse people. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk of late about refusing certain people that are coming in on our southern border. We don't refuse people that come to our country legally. There is a legal way in which you may come into our country and be possibly accepted as a citizen. We allow all kinds of people to come here and go to college and study, and then if they don't become citizens, they have to go back. There are legal ways in which people can come in, and that's all fine and good. But that has created a culture that is highly diverse. We have all kinds of people from all kinds of faiths and all kinds of ideas about the way things should be done. And that's fine and that's good as long as people are willing to make some compromises. We have to give a little and we have to get a little. It can't go all one way. So anyway, this compromise was big in the Constitutional Convention. Another compromise, also dealing with representation. One of the major fears of the South is that they are going to be unable to maintain slavery. They are from 1787 on until the Civil War, the constant fear, the constant negotiation, the constant worry is that are we going to be, if you're a Southerner, they're going to be thinking, are we going to be outnumbered by free states that do not want to allow slavery? And if that's the case, then will they make a law that will ban slavery? And really that's why the Civil War started, is when Fort Sumter and South Carolina seceded from the Union, and a lot of the other states seceded from the Union. because of Abraham Lincoln. When Abraham Lincoln took office, he was the first Republican Party president, and the Republican Party platform had in it that they wanted to abolish slavery. Now, Lincoln said he wasn't determined to do that. That wasn't something he was going to attempt to do. His main goal was to preserve the Union and keep all the states together. But South Carolina was a little hot-headed, and they decided, hey, if Lincoln is elected, we're out of here. And that's exactly what they did. And 10 other states followed him fairly quickly after South Carolina seceded. But we'll get to that more later on. So the other issue about representation had to do with the slaves in the South. The South had a lot of people, but a great deal of those people were not free. They were slaves. And so the South said, well, we should be able to count our slaves as part of our population. Because remember, in the House of Representatives, the more people you had, the more representatives you had. And of course, you would think, just common sense would tell you, okay, if you're going to count your slaves, then you have to allow your slaves to be represented. Okay, well, that was unheard of, so they weren't going to do that. So here was the compromise. It's called the 3/5 compromise. And the idea was, okay, we're not going to let you count all of your slaves, and then that give you so much more representation. But for every 5 slaves that you have, we will allow you to pretend that there are really only 3. Okay, so we will give you a portion of your slaves as part of your population, and that will allow you to have more representatives in the House of Representatives. Okay, again, it was a compromise. It wasn't ideal, it wasn't perfect, but it was a way in which they could keep the South happy and willing to work with them about forming a new government, because that's really what the Constitutional Convention was all about. The Constitutional Convention was taking our new government that we had just acquired, we had just won through war with Great Britain, and we had been successful, and we were now independent, but our government that we had formed initially wasn't working. Thank goodness our founding fathers realized it wasn't working, and they had to make changes to it. Now, of course, what they end up doing is not changing it, but doing away with it altogether and bringing in the form of government we have today under the Constitution. So the first form of government for America was the Articles of Confederation, but that is done away with in 1789. I mean, it's written in 1787. As a matter of fact, you'll need to know this date. September 1787. Today we celebrate it as Constitution Day because this was when our founding fathers signed the Constitution and agreed to it. And again, it took them from May to September to develop this throughout all those compromises that they had to come up with and make. They eventually came up with "We the people," in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, you need to know what posterity is, so look that up if you don't know it. It isn't prosperous. It's not prosperity. It's posterity. But anyway, so September 17th is Constitution Day because that's the day they signed it, but that isn't the official day when it became law. It doesn't become law until 1789, which is when the 13 states, all 13 states, finally agreed to it. And it has been our way of living. It has been our legal system, the supreme law of our land since 1789. So that, again, that's unique. That's not, most countries don't have that, and we don't want to lose that. And that's why whenever you make a change in anything constitutional, you don't just do it willy-nilly. You don't just, hey, let's change the Constitution today. No, you can't do that. Our Constitution is important, it's foundational, it's fundamental to how we live. It's part of why we're successful. Of course, we give the Lord all the praise and all the glory for why we're successful, but one of the reasons why we're successful is He gave our founding fathers wisdom in creating this type of government. We're a democracy in a republic. You'll need to know that. A democracy in a republic. We were not that under the Articles. We were a confederation under the Articles, similar to what the Confederacy was during the Civil War. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. That's all we're going to do for today. Take some notes, show me a picture, and then tomorrow be ready for a quiz on this information. You can use your notes.